War is hell. It reaches every hand, from the soldier in the trench to the nurse at his side, from the engineer forging weapons to the families left behind. These are their stories. This is World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. Today's episode, In Good Faith. He sat across from her, his eyes burrowing into her like fire. In turn, her eyes affixed to his, hard, piercing, her eyebrows furrowed. Something hit the floor from across the small diner. She saw her chance. He looked away oh so briefly. She grabbed at the last biscuit and crammed it in her mouth. "Oh, come on," her brother Henry said. "I got distracted. That's not fair." She laughed through the dry biscuit, almost choking on it. She grabbed at her water, still laughing, and washed it down. "I didn't distract you, Henry. The diner did," she said, her mouth still crammed with pieces of biscuit. The water did not wash down. "You always win," he said, faking a sad face. She crumpled up a napkin and tossed it at him. He laughed. Ophelia Robinson had always been close to Henry, and when the train pulled into Salisbury that morning, he had met her. They could have gone to their parents' home immediately, but she wanted a biscuit from the local diner, something she had been craving the entire trip from Oxford College. She looked across the table at her smiling younger brother. She finally remembered the day 6 years ago when she boarded the train to Oxford. He had been 16 then, but now here he was, a grown man at 21. His eyes softened, his expression changed. "When are you going to tell Ma and Pa?" She had known that this conversation would happen. She had written to Henry about the job offer she had received from the British Defense Ministry, but she had not told her parents. "Well, I don't have to be in London for 2 weeks, so..." She paused, giving him a wry smile. "I'll tell them the night before I go." His face tilted in a "you cannot be serious" manner as he smiled at her from across the table. "Be serious." Their father Stuart was a Welshman and had been reluctant to send Ophelia to Oxford in the first place. His argument was that a number of Oxford grads were often poached by the British government, an entity that, as a Welshman, he saw as oppressive. "Well, I planned on telling them tonight." She placed the water glass down on the table and reached across for her brother's hand. She felt him take it. His hands were calloused and dry, probably from his work as a stonemason. "Father's going to be upset. Mother will go along with him because she knows that him being upset can land on her if she disagrees." "All true," her brother added. "I figure that if I tell them tonight, then by the time I leave in 2 weeks, hopefully they'll be used to the idea and accept it." "That's a heck of a hope. What is this job, anyhow? You never told me in your letter." "Assistant editor in the publications department." "What's that?" he asked. "Beats me. I guess I'll find out when I get there." She noticed a shift in his mood. It was subtle, but she knew him and could sense something. "Are you okay?" she asked him. He clasped his hands together and laid them on the table. His veneer broke. "I'm scared," he said, and dropped his head. She did not know how to respond to this. There was nothing that could put her in danger. What could he be scared of? She wanted to ask, but instead sat in silence. The silence seemed to last forever. Finally, he lifted his head, unclasped his hands, and reached across the table to take hers. She let him. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. She almost could not hear him. "I've been conscripted." She dropped his hands. "Did you say that—" He interrupted her. "Yes, I'm going to war." She was more nervous today than the night she had told her parents about her assignment 3 weeks before. Her father had indeed been angry. He had a son going to fight for a king he disliked, and a daughter on her way to work for him. To her father, it was unacceptable. He only lived in Salisbury because gambling debts had made him unwelcome in Cardiff. She had been wrong, however, on her assignment. She was not hired as an editor, but as a writer. She had always been a prolific writer. She had started by writing her observations in a journal when she was 10 years old. She honed this skill throughout grammar school and now college, where she graduated with honors. Professors often noted her astute observational skills and her ability to put what she saw into words. But today, her nerves were firing on all cylinders as she stood before the man that was in charge of the entire department for the first time. His office was a wood-paneled room adorned with newspaper clippings and front-page headlines lining the walls. She stood in front of a large mahogany desk and watched as he read her first ever article. She had been assigned to report on the first day of a battle that was currently taking place in France, along a river she had never heard of, a place called the Somme. They had given her the reports of casualties and some details and had given her one simple instruction: write about this. She had turned the assignment into her immediate superior, Percival Harris. He had read it, and without a word, he had taken her to this office and stood her before this man, handed him the article, and walked out, closing the door behind him. She glanced down at the nameplate on the desk as the man read her article. Sir Edmund Caldwell. She had heard the name throughout her first week at the agency. His reputation was as a man of prowess, efficiency, and an iron fist in the running of the publications department. Her knees started to shake as it approached the 5-minute mark of her standing there waiting. Finally, he laid the article on his desk and looked up at her. "You're standing. Why are you standing? By all means, please take a seat. I can see your knees wobbling from here." She lifted the hem of her green dress and took a seat in the large chair in the corner of the room. Still, she said nothing. He began. Ophelia Robinson, born in Cardiff, Wales, relocated to Salisbury in 1906, attended Oxford College, rare for a female, so even more impressive. "Thank you," she said quietly. She was disarmed. He seemed to know a lot about her already. He nodded his head in acknowledgement, but continued. "Father, Stuart Robinson, a Welshman who was practically ran out of the country due to excessive gambling. Your mother's Harriet Robinson. She followed him. Probably not her smartest move, honestly. Your grandparents are not big fans of your father. Brother Henry, now training at Waterford and set to be dispatched in the engineering corps in just a few months. I must say that you and your brother seem to be much smarter than your father. There's something to be said for that here." Her eyes trajected towards the floor. She had always been ashamed at their departure from Wales. She had loved the jagged coasts and the grassy knolls of her homeland. But she also loved her father. Outside of his gruff exterior, he could be a loving man, a caring man. He just showed it in ways different than others. She let out a nervous laugh. "You know a lot, sir." He sat back in his chair, his straight face turning into a soft smile. He was an older man, probably in his early 50s, she thought. His dark hair had some streaks of gray, and his face showed the signs of aging. But overall, his demeanor was polite, yet somehow also commanding. "We gave you this assignment for a reason. We know you can write. You're great with prose and narrative. But I needed to see how your writing would fit in this environment. You're to be commended. This was written as a seasoned reporter." She smiled. It was hard to hide her elation at this compliment. "Why, thank you again, sir." He nodded in recognition. "But this will not be used." Confused, now her smile quickly morphed into a frown. He saw this instantly. "Allow me to explain. Whenever we get a new writer, we give them an assignment like this to gauge their talent a little more. Real-world talent, not that school crap. We never use the first article from any new writer. You aren't being punished here." This softened the blow, but she had spent 2 days poring over reports and a casualty list in an effort to complete the assignment. So deep down, she felt disheartened, as if it had wasted her time. He must have read her expression because he began again. "I know you think you wasted your time writing this, but believe me, you did not." She leaned forward in her chair. What did he mean by that? In normal times, this type of reporting would be spot on. But we're at war. This is not what we do here. She was curious now and unable to stop her brain from making her mouth move. What do we do here then? She asked. That is a good question. He stood from behind the desk and walked towards a clipping on the wall. He glanced at it a moment and turned back towards her. In war, we need the public's trust. We need the public's support. Without it, we will fail. When reports come in, like the one you were given, if we focus on the negative, we will lose all of that support. Do you understand? Not really, sir. I reported the facts as they were given. Shouldn't the public know about those facts? Newfoundland lost over 700 men in 20 minutes. She had started to raise her voice but restrained it as she went. Are you saying that we should gloss over facts and try to turn every story into a net positive? He stood for a moment, his eyes still soft, no anger in him. That's what we do here. He crossed back to his desk and sat back down. Again, you did nothing wrong here. You spoke in facts and the article's quite good. If this article was written 3 years ago about a mine collapse, it would include the details the public needed to hear. But now, in time of war, the public needs to hear of heroes, of wins. Without that, the Army will not be able to recruit. And if the Army cannot recruit fresh men, it puts our existing troops, our tired men, in danger. He sat back and delivered the final blow. And soon, your brother will be one of those tired men. She watched Percival Harris read the copy she had just finished. When he was done, he looked up at her. This is good, really good. Some of your best work, Ophelia. It had been well over a year since her initial meeting with Caldwell, and she had learned a lot since then. She no longer listed casualty numbers or told stories of the horrors of war. Instead, she wrote of the victories, of the sacrifices and heroic effort of the boys, and more importantly, of the horrors the German impressed on British heroes. He continued, I especially like the anecdote in here about our man lying in the mud, hiding from the Huns and escaping. This is exactly what I have come to expect from a writer such as yourself. It's perfect. She beamed with pride at hearing these words. She was becoming very good at this job. Enlistment was up across the country and the outlying colonies such as Australia and Canada. She was proud. Percival Harris was a handsome man in his early 30s. His dark brown hair and brown eyes were a contrast from her own red hair and green eyes. She was slightly taller than he was, but that did not matter. He had a stature she did not. He was a senior editor, something she was aspiring to be. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a packet. The packets were familiar now. They contained details of battles and casualties. She would read the contents, and she would then create her own narrative of the happenings. A little place called Ypres in Belgium. Go over this and get me a copy in 2 days. Can you do that? He knew she could and would. She knew he knew this. Of course, was her answer. Back at her desk, she opened the file. She had read files on this place before. In fact, the last packet was from Ypres. There was a lot of fighting in that area. Percival must have forgotten that her last packet and copy had been from there. He did that a lot. There were 15 other writers he had to supervise, so it was expected that he'd forget sometimes. This one was slightly different. It was labeled Passchendaele and not Ypres. It included some photographs as well as field communications, which was normal, but what stood out to her was the excerpts of letters from soldiers. These were something she had not seen before. She smiled as she read through them. The soldiers wrote of the camaraderie at the front, the treatment they received from their superiors, and the food. They really seemed to like the quality and abundance of the food they were being provided. Next were the photographs. Men eating, men sleeping comfortably inside and outside of tents, men playing cards and laughing together. These were perfect. She would use a few of these for her story. She began to write. 3 hours later, she had finished. She had written of the kinship the men had in the field, the pride they felt in their endeavor, and the way the military was caring for them. She wrote an anecdote about two soldiers saving another after a shell blast. She had no idea if this happened, but in the context of battle, this story was plausible. So she wrote it out. She told another of a German soldier bayoneting a boy mercilessly even though the boy had already been incapacitated. She had to show the public what evil their boys were up against out there. She had just returned to her desk after handing her story off to Principal Harris. The packet still lay there. In the past, she would file the packet in a drawer and wait for another to arrive. But this time, she opened it again. Maybe she could get another story out of this. She had time. Again, she found herself reading the letters and looking at the photographs. One photo in particular caught her eye. It was of a man smiling large at the camera as he ate out of a dented metal bowl. He looked jovial, happy even. But that's not what caught her eye. It was the background, something she had not noticed the first time. There was another man. He was wrapped in a blanket sitting on a fallen tree trunk. He looked sad, dirty, and miserable. He was a contrast to the focus of the image. Did the photographer not notice him? She looked closer. She dropped the photograph and her hands rushed to her mouth when she realized it was Henry. She stepped off the train at Salisbury Station expecting to walk the 2 miles to her parents' home. Instead, she was met by them as she stepped onto the platform. "Ma, Pa, what are you doing here?" she asked as she embraced her mother. "You told us you were coming. We wanted to meet you, that's all," said her father. Her mother broke the embrace and said, "He wants to show off the new motor car he bought." This surprised Ophelia. "Motor car? However did you afford a motor car?" Her father stood back straight and beamed with pride. "Henry's paychecks come to the house, and he told me to buy one." "You spent Henry's money?" Ophelia asked, unable to hide the disappointment in her voice. It was her mother who answered. "Not usually, no. Your father's still working at the butcher shop. Henry just wanted to give us a gift." She looked at her father disapprovingly. "You should have said no, father." He ignored her, put his hands on her shoulder, and pulled her in for an embrace. She forgot the disagreement instantly. She had never imagined her father driving anything but a horse and wagon. But here she was, sitting in a motor car for the first time, watching her father work a crank at the front of the car. She heard the roar of the engine, then watched as her father climbed in behind the steering wheel. He put on a pair of gloves and goggles, and then it dawned on her that this motor car was topless. He looked back at her, and she could see his eyes. They looked larger from behind the goggles. "This is an Austin. It's British made, but we won't fault that. It was cheaper than the Model T, and it's mighty fun to drive." He turns back towards the front, wrung his hands on the wheel. She felt the car lurch forward and begin down the road. She had not been home in over a year. She noticed a broken window as they approached and the once stark white paint on the exterior beginning to brown and peel. Maybe they should have used the money to fix the place up and not a car, she thought to herself. It was something she would never say out loud, not with her father present anyway. Her father carefully manipulated the car into the carriage house. She wondered what happened to the wagon. Did they sell it? She addressed her mother. "Ma, what did you do with the wagon? With Snowflake?" Snowflake was the family horse. "Well, we sold Snowflake to the Hendersons across town. We used the wagon for firewood over the winter." Her parents had always been practical people, outside of her father's gambling, that is. So this answer surprised her. "Why would you not keep the wagon and Snowflake? Just in case something happened to the car?" she asked, to no one in particular. It was her father who answered. "What could happen to the car? They say these can last 100 years. He turned back to look at her excitedly. "The man at the car place told me that these are actually safer than a horse and wagon. Can you imagine that? Safer and more reliable. Sure, I have to put petrol in, but it beats feeding a horse 3 times a day. And don't get me started on the shoes and the stable upkeep. This is just better." It was her mother who spoke next. Didn't the Zimmers hit a tree with their car? Didn't they get injured? Well, yeah, he returned, but that was Frank's fault, not the car's. I actually brought that up to the man at the car place the other day when I stopped to visit. Turns out Frank and Ellie were fighting. She was nagging and he got distracted. When you nag, I tune you out, so we're okay. They exited with Ophelia giggling at the absurdity of the conversation. She could not believe that her father would just take another man's word for it when it came to the car. That evening, they talked around the small table in the kitchen. They discussed life, her job, and of course, Henry. When her head finally hit the pillow on the pallet her parents still had lain down in her room, it was already 10 p.m. She awoke to the smell of bacon and something else, like bread mixed with coffee. She wanted coffee. She slowly rose and stretched. She thought about changing from her nightdress, but didn't. Her father had seen her in a nightdress before, so what was the difference? What awaited her in the small kitchen was a sight she had seen many times before. Her mother cooking and her father reading a newspaper. She walked across the room and kissed her mother on the cheek. "Good morning, Mother." She then walked to her father. "Morning, Father." She kissed him on the top of his head. She sat across from him at the small round table. The seat next to him had always been reserved for Mother. There was fresh bread on the table. She took a slice. Her mother put a glass of cranberry juice in front of her. "Here, drink up. Breakfast will be ready in just a moment." "Can I have coffee, Mother?" This was new, and it made her father peek over his newspaper at her. "When did you start drinking coffee?" "When I started having to get up at 5 a.m. every morning, Father. It's the only way I don't fall asleep at my desk while writing." That made sense. He dropped his head back down into the paper and continued to read. A moment later, a plate appeared before her. It consisted of 2 fried eggs and 2 slices of bacon, and next came a cup of strong black coffee. She could tell it was strong because the aroma made her nostrils wince. She took a sip of the coffee, and her face contorted because of the strength. She looked up at the paper her father was reading. There was something peculiar about it. "What are you reading, Father?" He allowed the top of the paper to fall so he could peer over her again. "It's a newspaper. You haven't seen one of these?" She giggled at his attempt at sarcasm. "I know it's a newspaper, Father, but that's not a British one. Where is it from?" Her mother interjected. "Your father's been getting newspapers delivered from Switzerland, Sweden, and even Norway lately. He's been doing that ever since he received Henry's first letter from the front." "Gives me a better perspective of the war," he added. "What do you mean by that?" she asked. "Henry's letters paint a different picture than the government and the papers. That's all," her mother responded. She watched her father put the newspaper down on the table completely. His face was serious now. "I read the British papers too, but they work for the government. Hear them tell it, and we would believe that we have never lost a single battle over there, that our boys are feasting on whole chickens and roasted potatoes, that their uniforms are clean and whole. Henry's letters were more real. When he wrote last, 2 weeks ago, he had not had a clean pair of socks and boots without holes in them for a month. He watched 3 men get blown to bits by a German shell. He barely avoided dying himself." All of this started to hit home for her. She wrote these things. She also thought of the picture, the one where she saw her brother looking disheveled in the background. She was part of the team convincing the citizens of Britain that the war was going in their favor. She was the one trying to get more kids to enlist. Her father continued, "Anyhow, I find that the other papers, the ones from neutral countries, give it to me straight, where our papers tell us that the Germans are nothing but barbaric Huns that will bayonet a baby. They tell us that it's not the case. When the Germans say that we, the British, or even the French, are burning Belgian villages in an effort to slow the German advance, and that we don't care if the villages are there or not, they tell us that that's not the case." German papers say that? She was flabbergasted at that last description. "They say a lot more than that," he continued. "They say that Britain fights for profit and not for honor. They say that Britain hides the casualty rates from us. They say lots of things. Who knows what's true and what's not?" As the day went on, Ophelia read Henry's letters, and after her parents went to bed, she read the foreign papers. She had known she was stretching the truth since the day in Caldwell's office. She had no idea that the other side would be doing the same. Germany had been painted as barbarians. Germany pushed back, saying that Britain did that only so they did not have to look at themselves. For every evil action Britain described Germany as taking, Germany described two that Britain had done. These foreign papers spelled it out distinctly, and in a few editions she saw the pieces printed side by side, a comparison. She went to bed with the devastating thought that she and the others in the publication department were no better than the Germans, and that realization was a crushing weight that kept her from sleeping. You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, where history comes alive through the lives of those who lived it. If this episode moved you, please share it, follow, and leave a rating. Help keep these stories alive. Want to hold these stories in your hand? Explore the books inspired by them, available now on Kindle and in paperback.